Imagine for a second that you run a business where every time you buy raw materials, your cash just gets locked in a vault.
Oh, yeah. Like totally frozen.
Right. Totally frozen. And you don't see a single rupee of that cash again for over 6 months. 204 days to be exact.
Wow. That is a lifetime in manufacturing,
It really is. That's the time it takes to, buy the material, make your product, ship it out, and finally wrestle the actual payment out of your client's hands.
which leaves basically no room for error. I mean,
So,
if the market turns during those 204 days, you are just caught holding the bag.
yeah, operating under that kind of gravity would just crush most businesses. But now imagine you somehow figure out a way to break into that vault.
Okay.
You start optimizing every single inch of your factory floor, you tighten the screws on your collections, and you actually compress that 204-day waiting period down to just 89 days.
89 days. That's a huge drop.
Right. Suddenly, the cash is just flowing freely, and in the process, you watch your profits jump nearly 70%.
Which is just an incredible operational pivot.
Okay.
It completely changes the financial resilience of the whole organization.
Exactly. And today, we are looking at a company that pulled off exactly that pivot. Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We have a really fascinating stack of investor presentations, financial updates, and stock story analyses sitting in front of us today. And our mission is to unpack the story of one specific company, which is Ratnaveer Precision Engineering.
Now, I know what you might be thinking listening to this. A company making washers and metal tubes in India sounds like, well, a fairly dry, purely industrial topic.
Yeah, it definitely isn't the flashy tech startup we usually hear about.
Far from flashy. It's the absolute definition of invisible infrastructure. But I think that is what makes this deep dive so compelling. We aren't just looking at sheets of metal here.
No, we are looking at the hidden backbone of modern industry. Ratnaveer basically operates in a space known as the stainless steel downstream sector.
Right. Meaning they aren't the ones out there mining the iron ore or, running the giant fiery blast furnaces.
Exactly. They sit further down the river, they take raw steel and turn it into the highly critical precision components that literally hold our physical world together.
Like what?
Well, everything from the mounting structures of those sprawling solar farms you see to the suspension systems of railway cars.
Yeah, and the broader narrative we're really exploring today is how a mid-tier Indian metal processor is actively attempting to carve out a highly profitable, insulated niche.
In a market that is otherwise pretty chaotic, right?
Remarkably fragmented and chaotic.
Yeah.
And they are trying to pull this off while navigating the relentless threats of cheap overseas imports and wild swings in commodity prices.
All of this happening against the backdrop of a structural shift in the country, which is the formalization of Indian manufacturing.
It's a lot to balance.
It is. So I want to start right on the factory floor. Before we can determine if this is a resilient, durable business, we kind of have to understand the mechanics of what they actually do.
Right, the day-to-day operations.
Yeah. You mentioned they aren't melting the iron ore. They run what's called a conversion business.
And that term, conversion, it really dictates their entire reality.
How so?
Well, they purchase raw stainless steel coils and heavy sheets directly from the primary steelmakers. Then, they apply a series of rigorous processes.
Like cutting and stamping.
Exactly. Cutting, stamping, threading, forging, finishing. They do all of that to convert that raw, flat commodity into a highly specialized, higher value product.
Got it. And the sources give us a very clear breakdown of what those finished products look like. Based on their recent disclosures for FY24 and FY26, we can categorize their output into basically 5 key product lines.
Okay, let's hear them.
The largest segment, which historically makes up about 47% of their revenue, is finishing sheets. Then you have tubes and pipes bringing in roughly 17% of the revenue.
And the rest.
The remainder is made up of sheet metal components, fasteners, and washers. But the product line I really want to talk about today is washers.
Ah, washers. Yes, they are the absolute cornerstone of their profitability strategy.
See, I need to push back here for a second, because when I hear the word washer, I immediately think of that, like, little insignificant metal donut I drop under the sofa when I'm trying to assemble flat pack furniture.
Right, the one that rolls away and you never find it.
Exactly. And it costs a fraction of a cent. So how on earth is a company building a strategic, multi-crore profit engine out of metal donuts?
Well, the hardware store washer you're picturing is a very generic, low-grade piece of metal. Ratnaveer is operating in an entirely different universe.
Okay.
They are strictly a business-to-business supplier.
hmm
So they sell to large industrial buyers, global distributors, and OEMs.
OEMs meaning original equipment manufacturers, so the companies building the actual wind turbines or automobiles.
Correct. And when an OEM is building a multi-million-dollar piece of machinery, a washer is no longer just a cheap metal donut. It's a critical point of load distribution.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, and the recent data shows that while washers might only represent roughly a quarter of Ratnaveer's total revenue, they actually generate over 52% of the company's profit pool.
Wait, really?
Yes, they are pulling outsized profits from this single component.
Over half their profit from washers alone. Okay, explain the mechanics of that. Why would an industrial buyer pay such a premium for this?
It really comes down to complexity and exactness. Ratnaveer doesn't just make one type of washer. They produce over 2,500 distinct SCO stock keeping units just for washers.
2,500 variations of a washer. That seems incredibly specific.
It is, and that variety is completely non-negotiable for their clients. Think about the end-use applications we are dealing with here.
Like the automotive sector you mentioned.
Yeah, in automotive, a failing component can lead to a catastrophic accident. Or take wind energy, where a turbine is subjected to relentless vibration and harsh weather for decades.
Or even the specialized hooks securing heavy solar panels to roofs, right?
Exactly. If you are an engineer designing a high-speed electromotor, you need a washer with an incredibly specific inner diameter, a precise outer diameter, an exact thickness, a guaranteed tensile strength, and a specific metallurgical profile just to resist corrosion.
Wow, okay.
Having 2,500 variations means Ratnaveer can meet those highly exacting engineering tolerances without the client having to compromise at all.
Well, let me bring in an analogy to visualize this conversion business model because I think it really highlights the tightrope they're walking. Think of Ratnaveer like a commercial bakery.
A bakery. Okay, I follow.
A bakery doesn't make money by owning wheat fields and growing grain. They buy flour, which is the raw commodity,
Yeah.
and they make their money based on their specialized skill in turning that flour into, say, a high-quality croissant.
Right. The profit is just the difference between the cost of the flour and the price of the croissant.
Exactly. That difference is the conversion spread. They buy raw steel, apply their skill, and sell the finished part. But here is the brutal reality of the bakery model. If the global price of wheat suddenly spikes due to a bad harvest, the cost of flour skyrockets. The bakery is in immediate trouble unless they can walk out to the display case and instantly raise the price of their croissants to match.
Which is hard to do.
Very hard. If they can't raise their prices, their profit simply vanishes. Even if they are selling the exact same number of pastries to the exact same loyal customer.
Yeah, and Ratnaveer is playing that exact same game, just with stainless steel and nickel instead of flour.
Right.
Which is why having those 2,500 SKUs of washers is so vital. When you provide that intense level of customization and exactness, you shift the conversation away from pure commodity pricing.
Because they aren't just buying metal anymore.
Exactly. The buyer is paying for the perfect fit and the guaranteed reliability. That allows Ratnaveer to capture a wider, more protected conversion spread on those specific parts compared to selling a plain, flat finishing sheet where the only real differentiator is price.
So they've basically found a way to bake a very specialized, high-margin croissant.
You could say that, yeah.
Let's zoom out a bit and look at the size of the neighborhood they're trying to sell to. How big is the actual sandbox they are playing in?
To frame the macro picture, we have to look at the total addressable market. The broadest view shows that India consumes roughly 4 to 4.2 million tons of stainless steel annually.
But Ratnaveer isn't chasing all of that, right? Because that 4 million tons includes the raw, heavy output coming straight from the blast furnaces.
Right. They're only looking at the downstream portion. Their specific playground, so the downstream market requiring sheets, pipes, washers, and fabricated parts, is smaller but structurally vital.
How big are we talking?
The sources estimate this relevant submarket at roughly 1 to 1.4 million tons per year.
Let's put some monetary weight on that. Based on the data, that equates to a market size somewhere between 25,000 crores to 63,000 crores. That is a vast amount of money flowing through this specific downstream channel.
It is. And what makes this space so fascinating is its current structure.
How?
Well, you might assume a 63,000 crore market is dominated by 3 or 4 sleek, hyper-efficient corporate monopolies.
I mean, yeah, that's usually how these things go.
But it isn't. The downstream market is actually largely unorganized. A vast amount of this metal conversion work is currently handled by local, fragmented job shop fabricators, or the parts are simply imported from overseas.
And the sources point to specific structural tailwinds that are disrupting this unorganized market right now. They highlight several industries where the demand for high-grade stainless steel is accelerating really rapidly.
And we aren't just talking about basic building construction here.
No, the documents specifically call out pharmaceuticals and food processing.
Those two industries are perfect examples of why quality standards are tightening. Picture a huge mixing vat in a pharmaceutical plant, or a network of pipes in a dairy processing facility.
Hygiene has to be perfect.
Absolute perfection. Hygiene and corrosion resistance are non-negotiable requirements. You cannot use inferior, cheap metal that might microfracture, rust, or leach contaminants into a batch of medicine or milk.
Right, because the metal has to withstand aggressive chemical cleaning and sterilization day in and day out.
Exactly.
The sources also highlight water infrastructure and urban housing. As cities expand rapidly, the sheer volume of plumbing, industrial pumps, and water treatment plants required is immense.
And the common thread across all these sectors is a profound shift in procurement mentality.
Yeah.
It is a transition away from a mindset of, let's just buy the cheapest metal available, to a mandate of, we must procure the most reliable component.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, a local fabricator operating out of a garage down the street might be able to stamp out a piece of metal cheaper than Ratnaveer.
Probably, yeah.
But if you are an engineer, you absolutely do not want a cheap, uncertified, untraceable bolt holding together the high-pressure valve in a city's water treatment plant. The consequences of failure, both legally and physically, are just catastrophic.
Which brings us to a crucial question about the competitive landscape. If the market is shifting decisively toward quality, who is Ratnaveer actually fighting against to win these lucrative contracts?
Let's map out the battlefield. You have a very distinct hierarchy. On the high end, you have the true titans. Companies like Jindal Stainless and Tata Steel.
Right, the integrated giants.
Yeah, these are the guys who mine the ore, run the furnaces, and actually dictate the raw material prices. Then on the low end, you have the thousands of unorganized local fabricators we just mentioned, who are fighting tooth and nail entirely on price.
But if you look at the trade data, the most formidable threat isn't domestic at all. It comes from imports.
Yeah, I read this part.
The sources reveal a rather startling statistic. In a recent FY25 period, Vietnam alone accounted for 83% of India's stainless steel import value.
83% from Vietnam alone. That is a heavy shadow hanging over the domestic producers. So where does a mid-tier company like Ratnaveer sit in this crossfire? I mean, they aren't Tata Steel, and they aren't a cheap Vietnamese import.
They occupy a highly specific hybrid position. In their cornerstone washer market, they are a top-tier niche player. They are actively aiming to expand their capacity to 74,000 metric tons per annum just for washers.
Which is a significant volume for such a specialized component.
Huge volume. However, in the broader sheet and tube market, they remain a smaller challenger trying to hold ground against the domestic giants and the flood of imports.
So put yourself in the shoes of a global procurement officer for, say, a major European wind turbine manufacturer. You need 50,000 specialized washers. Why do you choose Ratnaveer?
Right, why them?
Yeah, why not just buy a cheaper imported washer from Vietnam? Or go to a massive, established domestic giant who handles everything from the iron ore to the finished product?
That is the pivotal question. And the answer reveals Ratnaveer's true competitive moat. It has very little to do with having a flashy brand name or an aggressive marketing team.
What is it then?
Their moat is built entirely on certifications. We are talking about ISO 9001 for quality management systems, ISO 14001 for environmental management, ISO 14001 for occupational health and safety, and CE marks, which dictate European conformity standards.
I love how this plays out in reality because their competitive advantage is essentially bureaucratic friction.
Bureaucratic friction. Walk us through how that looks in practice.
Well, getting onto an approved vendor list for an aerospace manufacturer, a global automaker, or a pharmaceutical giant is an exhausting, grueling process. The buyer doesn't just take your word for it.
No, they definitely don't.
They send teams of auditors to your factory in India, they inspect your metallurgy labs, they review your safety protocols, and most importantly, they demand batch traceability.
The paper trail.
A perfect paper trail. If a bolt snaps on an automobile suspension 5 years from now, that automaker wants to be able to trace that specific bolt back to the exact day it was stamped, the exact machine that stamped it, and the exact coil of raw steel it was cut from.
It requires an intense, uncompromising level of administrative scrutiny.
Immense scrutiny. But here's the beauty of the moat. Once you pass all those audits, once you prove that you have the paperwork, the rigorous testing, and the reliability, you are in the club.
You're verified.
Yeah, and those global OEMs do not want to switch to a cheaper supplier in Vietnam just to save a few pennies per part. The cost of sending auditors out to qualify a new supplier and the terrifying legal risk of a safety recall if the new, cheaper guy cuts corners on metallurgy, it's simply too high.
It's not worth the risk for them.
Exactly. Once you are embedded in their supply chain, it is very hard to dislodge you. It is a moat made entirely of paperwork, process, and proven reliability.
And crucially, that paperwork translates directly into an impenetrable barrier to entry for the unorganized, low-end fabricators operating locally.
Because they can't keep up with the audits.
Exactly. Those small shops simply do not have the capital, the sophisticated quality control technology, or the administrative stamina to maintain those ISO certifications and endure continuous audits.
So a moat built on reliability and bureaucratic friction sounds fantastic in a boardroom presentation. But how does all that paperwork actually translate to the bank account?
Fair question.
I mean, dealing with endless audits and holding specialized inventory usually bleeds a company's cash dry. Are they actually making money efficiently, or are they just shuffling expensive metal around?
Let's look at the top-line growth trajectory first, because it provides the necessary context. In FY24, their total revenue was roughly 595 crores.
Okay.
Fast forward to FY26, and that revenue reached around 1,078 crores. They have significantly scaled up their operations in a relatively short window.
It's impressive top-line growth, but as we discussed with our bakery analogy earlier, revenue is just the total value of all the croissants sold. What about the actual profit margin? Are they protecting that conversion spread?
The financial documents show that their EBITDA margins, which give us a clear view of their core operational profitability before interest and taxes, sit in a narrow, stable band around 11.4%.
11.4%. Okay, they certainly aren't pulling in the 70% margins of a software company, but for heavy industrial manufacturing, it seems steady.
It is highly typical for a healthy, optimized metal conversion business. It indicates they're consistently capturing their conversion spread, even as the underlying raw steel prices fluctuate.
Right.
But to really understand if their financial engine is healthy, we have to look past the profit margin and examine their working capital cycle.
Ah, this is where the story gets really interesting. This is the 204 days versus 89 days metric we started the show with.
Because Ratnaveer must buy expensive stainless steel coils and hold them in inventory before they can process and sell them, a vast amount of their cash gets trapped in physical metal sitting on the factory floor.
Just sitting there doing nothing.
Exactly. The true efficiency of a conversion business is defined entirely by how fast they can turn that raw steel back into liquid cash.
Right, going from cash in the bank to steel in the warehouse to a washer on a truck to a paid invoice. And the numbers provided in the sources regarding this cycle are genuinely striking.
What were the exact numbers again?
Well, in FY23, their working capital cycle was 204 days. That is a sluggish, heavy burden to carry.
It is a profound vulnerability. Having cash locked up for nearly 7 months restricts your ability to grow, forces you to borrow heavily just to keep the lights on, and exposes you to severe risk if the market drops while you are holding all that inventory.
But the progression over the next few years is wild. By FY25, they squeezed that cycle down from 204 days to 114 days. And by the end of FY26, they drove it down to just 89 days.
Dropping from 204 days to 89 days requires a fundamental rewiring of the company's operations.
Yeah, how do they even do that?
It implies they instituted much tighter inventory management. So buying only what they need, exactly when they need it. It implies faster processing times on the factory floor. And crucially, it implies they are enforcing stricter payment terms and collecting receivables from their clients much faster.
It's the difference between wading through mud and running on a track. And this new operational speed plays directly into the business realities of scaling a manufacturing plant.
Let's look at what happened in the fourth quarter of FY26. Their production volumes increased. They went from producing 36,129 metric tons in FY25 to 46,668 metric tons in FY26.
And because they are pushing significantly more volume through the exact same factory, the realities of fixed costs take over the income statement. I want to break this down because it is so central to manufacturing profits. Ratnaveer has heavy, expensive stamping machines. They pay rent on the facility, they pay a baseline of electricity and administrative salaries.
Those are all fixed costs.
Exactly. Whether those stamping machines cut 1,000 sheets of metal a day or 10,000 sheets, the rent and the depreciation on the machine remain largely the same. So as you push more volume through the plant, those heavy fixed costs are spread out over a much higher number of finished units.
The cost burden per unit drops dramatically, which widens the profit margin on every additional item sold past the break-even point.
We see the undeniable proof of this mechanic in their Q4 FY26 results. Their revenue increased by 22.6%, which is a solid quarter. But their EBITDA, their profit, jumped by 69.2%.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah. The profits grew substantially faster than the revenue because the factory was running more efficiently, absorbing those fixed costs across a larger volume of washers and pipes.
It is a pristine example of how volume drives profitability in heavy industry. However, we do have to flip the pages and look at the other side of the balance sheet.
The debt.
Yes, to fund all this inventory and build out this capacity, they are carrying debt.
I'm glad you brought that up, and I actually want to push back on the rosy financial picture here. The sources show they have roughly 335 crores in gross debt, with a net debt of about 147 crores.
That's a significant amount.
When you look at a cyclical industrial manufacturing company carrying hundreds of crores in debt, you have to ask, is this a house of cards? If demand drops, does that debt crush them?
It requires careful context, and the structure of the debt is far more important than the absolute number. The financial updates clarify that their debt is heavily skewed towards short-term working capital borrowings.
Meaning they aren't taking out 30-year mortgages to build speculative new headquarters. They are using bank credit lines specifically to purchase the stainless steel that sits in their warehouse.
Precisely. The debt is entirely functional. It acts as the lubricant for their daily operations, and currently, the metrics show it is highly manageable. Their interest cover ratio is sitting at 3.7x.
Meaning their operating earnings are 3.7 times higher than their required interest payments to the bank.
Right. They have a comfortable buffer to service the debt right now, but you are correct to identify it as a vulnerability.
Because of the short-term nature of it.
Because they rely so heavily on short-term bank lines to fund their inventory, this financial structure is highly sensitive to the economic weather.
If the metal cycle turns against them, say, global demand for wind turbines plummets, or the price of stainless steel drops abruptly, leaving them holding a warehouse full of expensive inventory, their earnings could compress quickly.
Very quickly.
And suddenly, those short-term debt obligations feel much heavier.
They are walking a tightrope. They are balancing it beautifully right now by keeping that cash cycle down at 89 days, ensuring money is moving fast enough to pay the credit lines. But a strong macroeconomic wind could make things precarious.
So, assuming they maintain their balance on the tightrope, what is management's playbook for the next 5 to 10 years? They've optimized the factory floor. They've aggressively shrunk the cash cycle. To keep this growth engine running, where do they go from here?
The strategic playbook, detailed in the sources, relies on a few very deliberate levers. The first is a dedicated capital expenditure, or CapEx plan. They have outlined a 106 crore two-phase facility expansion.
Okay, big expansion.
Phase 1, which required roughly 46 crores, is already operational and is currently running at about 50% utilization.
And what are they doing with that new factory space? Are they just stamping out more of the same flat finishing sheets?
No, and this is the second key lever, actively moving up the value chain. They are consciously trying to shift their product mix away from standard low-margin commodity products.
So what are they making instead?
They are focusing this new capacity on highly engineered, complex components. We are talking about precision items like circlips, specialized industrial fasteners, and EP pipes.
What are EP pipes?
Electropolished pipes used in highly sterile, demanding environments like biotech labs and semiconductor manufacturing.
Moving from the basic flour to the complex high-end pastry, to bring back our bakery analogy.
Exactly. They want to capture a larger conversion spread. The third lever is leveraging their existing global network for cross-selling and deepening their export penetration.
How big is that network currently?
The sources show they already serve a vast base, over 3,500 distinct clients spread across more than 30 countries, facilitated by 89 global distribution partners.
That is a sprawling, complex logistics network for a mid-tier Indian processor to manage.
It is. And management's stated goal is to walk into an existing client's procurement office, say, a solar panel installation company in Germany, and instead of just selling them the specialized washer, they want to provide the entire bill of materials.
The whole package.
The washer, the specific nut, the high tensile bolt, the mounting hook, the bracket, everything.
This reminds me of the classic fast food combo meal strategy.
A combo meal. Explain how you see that applying here.
Well, once a fast food joint gets a customer in the door, and that customer commits to buying the burger, which in Ratnaveer's case is that highly customized certified washer, the restaurant doesn't stop selling.
No, they always ask if you want fries.
Right. They want to add the fries and the drink. They want to add the circlips and the fasteners. If Ratnaveer can act as a one-stop shop for all of that solar company's stainless steel hardware, it makes life infinitely easier for the customer's procurement team.
Because they only have to issue one purchase order instead of 5.
Exactly. And crucially, it locks the customer in deeper.
It dramatically increases that bureaucratic friction we discussed earlier.
Exactly. Why would the German solar company want to audit and manage 5 separate suppliers across Asia when Ratnaveer can reliably provide the entire combo meal with all the necessary ISO certifications?
It is a very effective strategy for increasing the lifetime value of a client. And what is vital to understand is that this entire growth playbook, the higher value electropolished pipes, the combo meal cross-selling, the export push, relies heavily on the ongoing formalization of global industries.
Wait, so they actually need the rules and regulations to get stricter?
They do. In India, the push for stringent BIS standards, the Bureau of Indian Standards, is actively raising the barrier to entry.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Every time the government mandates a new, rigorous quality standard for industrial materials, it puts immense operational and financial pressure on the low-quality, unorganized job shops.
Because they can't afford to comply.
Right. The small fabricators often can't afford the testing equipment or the administrative overhead, which actively pushes them out of the market and drives that volume towards certified compliant players like Ratnaveer.
So the growth story sounds incredibly compelling. They're climbing up the value chain, squeezing every drop of efficiency out of their cash cycle, and directly benefiting from stricter government regulations.
It's a strong position.
But we are talking about heavy industrial manufacturing, and things can, and often do, go horribly wrong. Let's look at the failure modes. Where are the cracks in the armor? What could break this machine?
The first, and perhaps most immediate risk, brings us right back to the inherent vulnerability of being a conversion business. It is the constant threat of the spread squeeze.
Right. What happens when the price of flour spikes?
Nickel and stainless steel are globally traded commodities subject to intense volatility driven by, geopolitical events, mining strikes, and global shipping disruptions.
Stuff completely out of their control.
Completely. If input prices suddenly spike, and Ratnaveer cannot pass that increased cost on to their clients immediately, perhaps because they are locked into fixed-price delivery contracts for the next quarter, their profit spread vanishes overnight.
Wow.
They could be operating the factory flawlessly, hitting all their volume targets, selling the exact same number of washers, and yet watch their earnings drop sharply.
Because they are forced to eat the cost difference. That is a brutal reality of the sector. And speaking of brutal realities, there is another vulnerability buried in the sources that feels like a bombshell statistic when you read it. Customer concentration.
Ah, yes.
The data shows that in FY25, a staggering 72% of their revenue came from just their top 10 customers.
That is a critical, glaring vulnerability. It means their financial fortunes are deeply tied to the procurement decisions of a very small, concentrated group of buyers.
72% tied to 10 clients. That sounds terrifying. I mean, if just one procurement manager at one of those top 10 companies has a bad day or decides to switch to a competitor.
Or if one of those clients gets acquired and changes their supply chain.
Yeah. It's not just a minor dip in revenue for Ratnaveer at that point.
Far from it. A loss of a top-tier client wouldn't just hurt the top line. It would trigger a cascade of operational issues. It would suddenly leave heavy, expensive factory capacity sitting completely idle.
And we know how bad that is for fixed costs.
Right. And as we discussed earlier, Idle capacity quickly destroys the profit margins that make the business attractive in the first place. The factory rent still needs to be paid, the machinery still depreciates, the bank still expects interest payments, but significantly fewer parts are moving out the door to absorb those costs.
And beyond the risk of losing a specific customer, there is the broader risk of cyclicality.
Yes, their fate is inextricably tied to broad industrial capital expenditure. Ratnaveer does not create consumer demand.
They just supply the builders.
Exactly. If macroeconomic factors cause commercial building construction to slow down, if government funding for new railway lines stalls, if private investment in wind energy dips due to interest rate hikes, the demand for downstream stainless steel components drops right alongside it. Ratnaveer does not control the macroeconomic weather. They just have to figure out how to sail in it.
I want to bring up one more factor mentioned in the analysis, which is the management dynamic itself. While the numbers clearly show they've executed remarkably well on this recent capacity expansion and fundamentally fixed their working capital cycle, the available data characterizes the organization as highly promoter-centric.
Which is a very common structural reality in mid-sized Indian manufacturing firms. The founders maintain tight, hands-on control.
Common, yes, but it poses a long-term risk. The sources point out that there is limited visibility on the depth of the management bench. There isn't a clear picture of strong, independent corporate governance operating beneath the primary promoters.
That raises a valid question of corporate resilience. If the key promoters were to stumble, or if the business simply scales to a point, say, adding another 50 global distribution partners, where it outgrows their direct, hands-on management style, is there a robust institutional corporate structure in place to catch them?
Or is the entire operation, the bank relationships, the client negotiations reliant entirely on the vision and energy of a very small group of individuals?
It's the difference between a business driven by personality versus a business driven by institutional process. And as they expand globally, process becomes paramount.
So if we synthesize all of this, the tightrope walk of debt, the threat of cheap imports, the bureaucratic moat, and the operational pivots, what is the ultimate takeaway from this deep dive into Ratnaveer Precision Engineering?
Briefly recapping the story, we're looking at a fascinating transition. It is the tale of an Indian downstream processor actively evolving from a company pushing generic volume in a chaotic commodity market into a highly optimized, fully certified, value-added industrial partner.
And the evidence of that successful evolution is undeniable in the numbers, driving a cash cycle down from 204 days to 89 days and maintaining steady 11.4% margins in a volatile commodity environment shows they're running an exceptionally tight ship on the factory floor.
But the stakes remain incredibly high. They are walking a tightrope balanced against extreme customer concentration, where losing just one major client hurts badly, and the constant looming threat of global commodity volatility.
It is a stark reminder of just how complex and fragile the industrial supply chain really is.
It really is.
And I want to remind you, the listener, why this matters outside of a financial spreadsheet or a factory floor in India. The physical world around you, the office building you work in, the car you drive, the power grid that charges your phone, the sterile vats that process the food you eat, relies entirely on businesses exactly like this one, operating quietly, efficiently, and invisibly in the background.
The invisible infrastructure holding the visible world together.
Exactly. To end today, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought built on the landscape we've explored. Right now, global supply chains are actively trying to diversify. Western OEMs are deliberately trying to reduce their heavy reliance on a single nation for manufacturing a movement often dubbed the China Plus One strategy.
It is a profound geopolitical realignment of global procurement. Companies are actively seeking safety valves.
And as that realignment happens, mid-tier, fully certified, audit-ready manufacturers in India, like Ratnaveer, might suddenly find their position fundamentally altered. They might find themselves not just competing on price against a local job shop, but acting as critical geopolitical safety valves for European and American manufacturers.
Which reframes their value proposition entirely. They aren't just selling a washer. They are selling supply chain security.
Exactly. Think about it. If a major European automaker needs to de-risk their supply chain to ensure they don't face sudden production halts due to trade disputes, how much of a premium are they willing to pay for a fully certified, traceable, highly reliable washer from India? That bureaucratic friction we discussed earlier might just become their most valuable asset on the global stage.
A fascinating thought.
It is certainly something to think about the next time you look at the sweeping silhouette of a wind turbine or simply hold a seemingly insignificant nut or bolt in the palm of your hand. Until next time, thanks for taking the deep dive with us.